Can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm super happy to be here. Let me just quickly raise the energy into the room a little bit. If you ask good questions in the end, I'll do more gymnastics. So my name is Cliff, and like Noah said, I am the CEO of a company called Speechify. And what we do is we use artificial intelligence and deep learning to allow students to scan any physical book and turn it into an audiobook. We do the same thing in your computer. But more interestingly about me, other than building stuff, is I am really dyslexic. Like really, really dyslexic. So first, second, third grade, fourth grade, I couldn't learn how to read, no matter how hard I tried. And so Noah has dysgraphia, which he explained a second ago. Dyslexia basically is a situation where it's usually difficult to read and spell. I'll go a little bit in more detail into some of the other nuances of what it feels like to be dyslexic. But I'm going to start by sharing with you my story and how I found out I was dyslexic and how I ended up coping with it, what I'm doing now as someone who is like a semi-adult, not really, with dyslexia. And then I'll go deeper into learning differences in general. So for me, reading one sentence takes as much energy and brain power as it takes most people to do a 4-digit long division equation in their head. And so you can imagine if you need to do 10 of these, that's a paragraph, you'd be tired by the end of doing 10 of these equations in your head. If you need to do 100 of these sentences, which is a chapter, you'd be exhausted. So when I was little and I would try to read, I would always fall asleep inside the book. And the book I wanted to read the most was Harry Potter. But, there you go. But every time I tried to read Harry Potter, I'd fall asleep. And so when I was young, and I was, I guess, in preschool, my parents, like most parents, tried to start teaching me how to read. And it didn't really work. And they said, oh, it's okay, he's supposed to read in first grade. So first grade came along, and I couldn't figure out how to read. And then second grade came along, and I still couldn't figure out how to read. And so my dad got this big puzzle that had all the alphabet on it. And we would sit on this puzzle every day together. And he would say, okay, Ofek, A. My name in Hebrew is Ofek. I actually grew up in Israel. And I moved to the US when I was 13. He said, okay, Ofek, Aleph, A, O, I, O, U, Bet, Babu, Bibo, Bu, Gimel, Gago, Gigo, Gu. And I could not make the sounds. And it didn't make sense to him that I couldn't make the sounds. Because I was a smart kid. I liked to talk a lot. But I couldn't figure out how to read. And so eventually my parents started, and my teachers, everybody thought I was slow and that I was lazy. People thought that I was not trying hard enough. And that was the most frustrating thing for me. Because my dad was my hero. When I was little, the one thing I wanted to be was, when I grew up, was my dad. Everybody loved him, I loved him, and for him to be disappointed in me felt horrible. So what I would do is I would grab a book, and I would sit on a couch somewhere, and I would pretend to read. And I did this for about 2 years and nobody noticed. And I'd sit in class and I just like ran my finger under the words, and I'd act like I was reading. But it took me so much energy to actually read that I just preferred to daydream instead. And then right before my 9th birthday, my parents figured out that I was lying to them about reading. And so they canceled my 9th birthday party. Which when you're 9 is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. And so that sucked, but the main thing that sucked was that my parents were disappointed in me. But even worse than that, was that I was really an ambitious kid. When I was in preschool, I wanted to be Prime Minister of Israel, a billionaire, and a pop star. And to be two of those things, you need to be able to read. So I decided that I was going to learn how to read. And so that year, over winter break, all I did was go to the public library and I would spend every day there trying to learn how to read. And I would keep falling asleep inside of Harry Potter. I don't think I got beyond the first 10 pages. And so my dad took pity on me, and though I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and my parents worked really hard when we were young, my dad was rarely able to come home for dinner, but he'd make a special exception for this. And he'd come home and he'd sit with me on my bed, and in a deep, slow voice, he would read Harry Potter. And I loved it so much that he started recording himself reading Harry Potter. And when he couldn't make it home in time, I would take a little cassette tape and I would listen to him reading Harry Potter. And I ended up listening to this cassette tape 22 times in a row. Actually, sorry. I ended up listening to it in Hebrew, so I learned the story really well in Hebrew, and then when I was 12, we moved to the United States. And I didn't speak English. And so the first thing that my dad did is he found Harry Potter in English as an audiobook, and he said, Cliff, Ofik, if I buy this for you, will you listen to it? And I was like, yes. He's like, but you don't speak English, and it's in English. I was like, yes, I will listen. And he's like, okay. So that's what I listened to 22 times in a row. And to this day, I have the first chapter of Harry Potter memorized. And that's how I learned English. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley at number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people we'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of Film Club's Running, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly a neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and had twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent most of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had everything they wanted. So Harry Potter was the first book I abused with audio. The next one was Narnia, and then Lord of the Rings, and then Percy Jackson, and then Game of Thrones, and then Atlas Shrugged, and then I read the Bible a couple of times just for kicks. And I fell in love with listening to audiobooks. So when I was 12, that was the first year, I listened to 100 audiobooks that year. And I've been listening to 100 audiobooks every year since, for the past 12 years. So I went from being a kid who hated books more than anything else, to being someone who hates reading but loves books. And other than my parents, the biggest impact that anything has had on my life are books. I usually listen to about 25% biographies, so everybody from Einstein to Thoreau to Hamilton to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Highly recommend Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography. To every fantasy book imaginable, every sci-fi book, and a bunch of books about self-help and business and economics and psychology and science. And so when I started high school, we had a book, Marley and Me. But Marley and Me didn't have an audiobook at the time, so I had to read it. And I couldn't. So a week before I started school, I sat down with my mom in her bed, and she read Marley and Me to me, even though I was a high school freshman. And when I was in high school, I had a period every day called academic workshop. It's like special ed, where all the kids who had trouble learning went, and there was this one guy there, his name is Mark, and he was a teacher's assistant, and I owe Mark and another teacher, Mr. Blaber, my high school career. Because with dyslexia, it's not only tough to read, it's also really tough to spell. And so I couldn't spell anything. And even when I would write something and the little red squiggly lines would appear, I didn't know which of the options was the right one. And so I would sit there, and Mark would sit behind me, and he'd say, that one. And so I'd click on that one, say, that one, and I'd click on that one. And that's how I wrote every essay in high school. Now, at the same time, I was also in every single AP and honors classes that my school offered. Except for the ones that the teachers did not let me attend. And so the hardest class where I went to school, I went to high school in Redwood High School in Marin County. My little sister Geffen actually went to Jchs. And there was this one teacher, I won't name her, but she taught BC Calculus. And I was very excited. I walked into school for the first period of BC Calculus, and the teacher was like, oh, sorry, we actually reassigned your schedule. You're not in BC Calculus anymore. And I was like, why? So it turns out my counselor had told this teacher that I had dyslexia, and she was like, oh, he has dyslexia? Well, everybody in my class gets 5 on the AP test. He will slow down the class. She's So she went to my counselor, she went to my previous teacher, she got my previous teacher to cancel the recommendations she'd made for me to be in BC Calculus, and then replace me in another class. So here's the problem. It's okay, my phone often rings as well. Some people don't understand what learning differences are. And when you have learning differences, sometimes you have accommodations, like being able to use an audiobook. But learning differences are a new concept. So if you're dyslexic, the way your brain works is there's the right side and the left side of the brain. And the way in which they're connected is different than typical brain. There's a portion of your brain that's in charge of decoding language. It's right here in your brain. And if you're dyslexic, that part of your brain works differently than most people. And so for me, when I walk around, I never read what the signs say. So I don't know any of the street names around where I live. But my sister knows all the street names, because when she walks around, she sees like Southwood, she just reads the word Southwood. But for me, it takes so much energy to read a word that I won't, by choice, do that. If there was a picture there of a squirrel, I'd know this is Squirrel Street, because it doesn't take me any energy to decode a squirrel. But it does take me energy to decode a word. And so dyslexia, dysgraphia, auditory processing, ADHD, ADD, they're all relatively new concepts. So some people are not aware of them. So she was not aware of it. So I had to do a lot of fighting, but eventually I got into the class, and I was in the top of the class because she gave me this little speech when I insisted. She was like, every year I have a senior boy who cries on my desk because he can't keep up. And I was like, great, well, even if that's me, that's okay, because I'd rather be in a place where I get to learn as much as possible. So then, for college, I ended up going to Brown University. Got it? Good. All right. For college, I ended up going to Brown University. And the great thing about Brown is Brown has what's called an open curriculum. You can choose the classes that you take. And so I ended up making my own major in renewable energy engineering, which is a mix of physics, engineering, and computer science. I skipped all the intro classes and basically took mainly master's level courses. And then did some more fighting with my counselors to make it so that I never needed to take the intro classes again. And about half the classes I took without prereqs, by convincing professors to let me do the class anyway. And so the cool thing about dyslexia and growing up dyslexic is you end up developing this insane level of grit and ability to persevere and ability to communicate in order to get the accommodations you need. And that ends up helping you a lot in life. So one way in which it helped me is I got into all the classes that I want. Another way in which it helps me is, like, for example, someone once stole my laptop. It took me about 7.5 hours to track him down, but I did, and I got it back. And it was because I'm really, really good at convincing strangers to do the things that I want. And I'm really, really good at persevering. So, I'm 18 years old, I'm about to go to Brown for school. We had a summer reading book, Sounds of Providence, and guess what? There's no audiobook for Sounds of Providence. So I tried to read Sounds of Providence. Now I'm 18, I should be able to read. I still couldn't read. And so I spent about half the summer trying to read Sons of Providence. And I couldn't do it. I read about half the book in 2 months. And so a week before school started, I sat with my mom in her bed, and she read Sons of Providence to me. But there's one problem. Sons of Providence is about 10 times longer than Marley and Me. So we didn't have time to finish Sons of Providence. So I did the only thing I could. I found a Kindle, I hacked it, and I made it use text-to-speech to say the whole book onto my iPhone, and then I listened to the book on my iPhone on the plane to school. And it worked. And I ended up being, turns out, the only person in my unit to actually have read the book. But this changed my life, because I was like, wow, there's this thing called text-to-speech, like dictation. And it lets me read without needing to do any decoding. And it means that anything can now be an audiobook. So what I did is I made the system a little bit better, and then a little bit better, and then a little bit better. So I studied renewable energy engineering at Brown, but the other thing I didn't share with you guys is I really like building things. So when I was a student, I actually ended up building about 36 products as an undergrad at Brown. And I won 2 years in a row every single startup competition and hackathon at Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. Tomorrow I'm going to go be a mentor at Stanford's hackathon. And I had tried to learn computer science in the past. And every single time, I would fail. Why? Because if you have any familiarity with computer science, there's these things called variables. And if you write a variable like this over here and misspell it completely differently over here, the program won't run. And so though I tried to learn computer science in high school, it didn't really work out very well. But when I was a sophomore in college, second year, I decided that I had to learn how to do computer science because I needed it in order to be able to overcome my dyslexia, because I wanted to make the text-to-speech software better, because there was no good text-to-speech software at the time. So I enrolled in the Intro CS class at Brown, which for me was really scary because I already knew that I was not very good at computer science. That was a mistake. Everybody's good at computer science. Computer science is actually really easy. You just need to find the right way for you to learn. It's just a more difficult thing to learn. So the first assignment took me about 15 hours. It took most people 3 hours to complete. And then what I did is I went to the dining hall. I found a little bag of bread, and when no one was looking, I turned it into 8 peanut butter sandwiches, stuffed it in my backpack, and went to the computer science lab. And then I got there at 8 in the morning, code, eat a peanut butter sandwich, code, fall asleep, coding, wake up, eat another peanut butter sandwich. And I did this until midnight, every day for about a month.
And at the end of that, I started to be able to tell the difference between a bug that was due to my spelling mistakes and a bug that was a real bug in the program. And so I ended up doing pretty good in the class. And then I found an online course that was video-based on how to make iPhone apps and websites. And that was the trick. Because for me, it's really difficult to read documentation, or it's really difficult to spell, but it's easy for me to see someone else do something on a video and then switch and do it myself. So what I did is I figured out the way in which it's ideal for me to learn. And then I started making Speechify better and better and better. So the next thing that I did is I built an iPhone app that lets me take pictures of physical books. It uses deep learning-based, deep learning is a subcategory of artificial intelligence. It's a class of algorithms that did not exist about 18 months ago, and just now they start to become viable. It basically let me take pictures of my books, and boom, it would turn it into an audiobook. And it reads it with an HD voice that sounds like human. And then I built a version for my computer that lets me highlight any email, any text message, Facebook message, Sons of Providence, ebook, whatever. Hit a keyboard shortcut, and it'll read it. Here's the other crazy thing. It's really easy to teach yourself how to listen fast, and people don't realize this. So, quick show of hands. Who has listened to an audiobook or a podcast? All right, that's basically the entire audience. Put your hands down. Who has listened to an audiobook or a podcast at more than 1x speed? Okay, that's about half the audience. It's a little bit difficult, at least for me, to learn how to read faster. It's much easier to learn how to speak faster. So, the average reading speed in the United States is 200 words per minute. The average listening speed is also about 200 words per minute. Maybe a little bit slower. And that's because it's the speed at which we're used to speaking. And so when I started listening to audiobooks, I suddenly started to listen at 1.25x speed, and then 1.5x speed, and then 2x speed, and then 2.5, and then 3x speed. And when I started to use Speechify, it made it even easier for me, because I made a little keyboard shortcut that let me jump at only 5 words per minute at a time. And so when I got to a section of a sentence that was complicated to understand, I reduced the speed to small. And when I already had read something, I increased the speed to big. And so today, when I use Speechify, I listen at about 600 words per minute. So when I listen with Speechify, I'm listening 3 times faster than the average reading speed in the United States. Here's the other crazy thing that happened. Because Speechify highlights the word on the computer, and it also highlights the word on the phone as it's speaking it. And I don't need to do the difficult thing for me, which is decoding. I just hear the word and see the word at the same time. I finally developed the memory of the word Cliff means my name, and the word house means house. And so now when I read, I actually read at above normal reading speed, because I skipped the whole process that is difficult for people with dyslexia. I never needed to decode it, because I used technology to do it. And the cool part is technology that I built for myself because I needed it. So the next thing that happened is this. I was about to graduate college, and all my friends are getting jobs at Goldman Sachs and Facebook and Uber and wherever. And I was like, I don't really want to go and work at one of these companies. I want to work for myself, because I built all these things already. I had a couple of apps that I built that had a couple of 100,000 users that were photo sharing apps, and then I built a solar cell that was really efficient, and a couple of other things. But I decided that none of those things created enough value in the world, and it didn't excite me enough. It wasn't something I wanted to work on for the next 10 years of my life. And so I took a deep breath. I stepped back, and I decided, okay, I'm actually going to stay in school, because I love Brown. But I didn't pay for my master's. And so what I did is I stayed as a visiting scholar. It's basically this position I invented for myself that allowed me to teach computer science and entrepreneurship at Brown for about a year. And during that time, I started reading about the application of artificial intelligence to text-to-speech. And so I built this basic thing in the past, but now I was able to do it with much better voices. So I implemented that into Speechify. And then I heard there was going to be a dyslexia conference in Florida the next day. So at 3 a.m. in the morning, I booked a ticket, showed up in Florida, snuck into the conference, jumped on stage after another speaker presented, and I was like, hi, my name is Cliff. I built this thing, let me show you. And so I plugged in my computer and I showed them how Speechify worked. And 15 of the school heads there said, this is really cool. I'd love to fly you out to teach our kids how to use Speechify. So that's what happened. And then more and more and more people with dyslexia started using Speechify. And so I have a principle that's really important to me in my life, which is above all else, the most important thing is to be the person you needed most when you were growing up. And so for me, it would have been fun to work on a photo sharing app, it would have been fun to work on a solo cell, it would help the world. But when I was little, the thing I needed the most was my mom reading my books to me. And even better would be something that allowed me to do it for myself. And so that's the thing I ended up choosing to work on. But here's the cool thing. Text-to-speech doesn't only help people with dyslexia, because people with ADD also have a lot of trouble focusing. And I also have ADD, as you can probably tell. So a lot of people with ADD started to use Speechify. And then a lot of people who are second language learners, like me, started to use Speechify. Actually, a lot of people in China, for some reason, use Speechify. And then, I don't know if you ever played sports, and I hope you haven't gotten a concussion, but sometimes you do get concussions in sports. And if you get concussions, you're not allowed to look at a screen for a long time. So people with concussions use Speechify. And then the coolest thing happened. Today, about 60% of our users don't have a learning difference. They're normal people who just want to be able to listen to Wikipedia in the car. Or are tired at night and don't want to look at a glaring screen. So they just download Speechify and they listen to their home. And they do it fast. And the great part is you can also increase your comprehension, because with Speechify, you can both listen and read at the same time. So that's a little bit about Speechify. You can ask me more questions about it later, but I want to dive deeper into learning differences in dyslexia. So, 5% of the populations of kids in public schools have dyslexia. However, 17 to 20% of the population have dyslexia. It's just most people are not diagnosed. And so for me, being diagnosed was the best day of my life. It was the moment where I could hang my hat on something and say, I told you guys, I'm not stupid, I'm not dumb, and I'm definitely not lazy. There's just a different explanation for what's going on here. And I was like, great. Now I know the problem, let's go and fix it. And so I was really lucky because my parents were really supportive, and I found a school that was supportive enough where some people were supportive, and some people I just needed to learn how to communicate. And so, what does it mean to be dyslexic? Well, dyslexia is on a spectrum. And some people are really dyslexic, I'm really dyslexic. And some people are mildly dyslexic. And so, dyslexia is not a thing where like the words flip or you see everything in mirror writing. Dyslexia is what I explained in the beginning often, where it just takes you more mental energy to read. People with dyslexia often spell phonetically. So and it's especially hard when there's letters that are similar. So in Hebrew, actually dyslexia for me is much worse, because they're taf, kaf, kuf, etc. In English, there's less letters like that. In addition, people with dyslexia have trouble remembering names, remembering dates. We often confuse our lefts and our rights. When I took my driving test, I took 4 right turns when he told me to take a left. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, sorry, I'm dyslexic. At the same time, there's a bunch of amazing benefits that people with dyslexia have. People with dyslexia are really good at creative thinking and imagination. We're good at spatial reasoning. So a lot of the best architects, fashion designers like Tommy Hilfiger, engineers and artists have dyslexia. Dyslexia is actually often dubbed the MIT syndrome and the NASA syndrome because so many engineers, designers, and astrophysicists at NASA and at MIT have dyslexia. People with dyslexia are also very good at remembering stories, but we're not good at remembering individual pieces of information. And finding the big picture and improvising. So a lot of famous actors are dyslexics. Keira Knightley, Jennifer Aniston, Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise, Channing Tatum, Orlando Bloom, and the list goes on. And finally, about 30% of entrepreneurs have dyslexia, and 40% of wildly successful entrepreneurs have dyslexia. So Richard Branson, Charles Schwab, actually, politicians often have dyslexia too. George Washington had dyslexia, and our current governor, Gavin Newsom, has dyslexia. However, a big percentage of the population who are incarcerated in prisons also have dyslexia. Because here's what happens. If you go to high school, and it's really difficult for you to read, you end up stopping paying attention. And you decide that you hate school. And then you do other stuff. And so when you do other stuff, there's kind of 2 options. Number 1, you end up doing what I did, which is I was like, I really like learning, but I don't like the school thing. But I really like building things, so I started building things. That's the story of Richard Branson. He dropped out of school when he was 15 and started a student magazine. And then now he runs Virgin Airlines, Virgin Galactic, and kind of like 200 very, very successful businesses. Or you start doing other stuff that is more negative. So, because so many people are undiagnosed, think about yourself, think about your friends. Dyslexia also runs in families, so if your grandma, if your aunt, if your sister, if your mom has dyslexia, it's likely that you have it too. It's more frequently diagnosed in boys because when boys have trouble, they act out. Girls do so less. And so it's not that dyslexia appears less in girls, it's just that people notice it less. The other thing to know about is ADD. 360 million people in the developed world have ADD, which makes it difficult to focus. And so in both those situations, what's important is to find how you learn best in the same way that I found how I learned best when I decided to try everything to learn how to read, and eventually I found a trick, which for me was listening. And then I tried everything to learn how to code, and then I found a trick, which is watching videos. And so the last thing I'll leave you here with today is a quick summary of what we discussed. Number one. 1 in 5 people have dyslexia, 20%. Most people are just not diagnosed. And a much wider portion of the population has other learning differences, like dysgraphia, like ADD, like auditory processing disorder, etc. It's really difficult to know that you have a learning difference because it's a new thing that we've only recently caught onto. And it's really, really important to know if you have a learning difference because then you can adjust the way in which you learn to optimize for your own personal growth. And the last thing that's extremely important to know is if you do have a learning difference, you have ADD or dyslexia, you're not stupid, you're not lazy, you're not dumb. You just learn differently. But the great thing is it comes with a lot of different strengths. Both strengths that are innate in how your brain works, whether it be visual processing or imagination, but strengths that are developed, like the ability to persevere, speak, and find your way through tough challenges.